Hello, hello, I'm Colin Wright, and I'm going to answer some of your questions. First question today. What if you are trying to make a change, but the reasons are selfish and irresponsible? How do you personally decide if a decision is valid or selfish? Can a balance be struck between serious commitments, such as parenthood, and growth and development of oneself? I personally cannot speak firsthand about the parenthood thing, but commitments as a whole, commitments in terms of parenthood and commitments in terms of commitments with a partner or work commitments or even commitments just to friends and family, these are things that ideally are taken very seriously because they are in a way kind of an expression of who you are. You treat other people and you treat these bonds between you and other people with the same type of seriousness that I think that you treat your sense of morality and your approach to living in general. And so those shouldn't be taken lightly. At the same time, it's important to consider that if you stick with something that makes you very unhappy, very likely in addition to you slowly but surely shriveling into a withered version of your former happy self, you will also then make the people around you quite miserable, and you'll kind of bring the entire thing down, not just you. And so your intent to gallantly sacrifice for everybody else, sacrifice yourself for everybody else, usually doesn't have the intended consequences. It's not like a valiant martyrdom, it's something that actually ends up sacrificing this entire structure that you're trying to save. It's also important to consider that in a lot of cases, the direct approach, like the commitment that you're considering directly, is not this holistic whole that you have to accept as is. If there is a work commitment that you've made to stay with a company for 2 years or something like that, chances are your only options are not sticking with everything as it is or quitting and breaking the contract. Chances are there's a lot of negotiation that can happen where you can change the circumstances maybe of the work that you're doing under that contract and make things a lot better so that you can have these experiences, maybe travel or just have more time for yourself or for your family in addition to work. Maybe you can change those circumstances in some way. You negotiate getting less pay and you work a 30-hour week instead of a 40-hour week, something like that. And that can apply to just about any commitment, I think, that you might find yourself in. The only absolutely certain way to avoid being in these types of commitments is to avoid being in these types of commitments that you can't hold up to ensure that you do not create the circumstances that lead to that type of binding agreement. And that requires a lot of forethought, and it requires knowing yourself so that you can know what types of commitments make sense for you and the type of life that you want to live and which ones do not. It takes a whole lot of sacrifice and potentially putting off things that you would like to do, but the risk is not worthwhile. It requires a whole lot of kind of emotional maturity too, and it's not something that we can all muster at every given moment. And so this will sometimes fall apart, and then sometimes you might find yourself in a commitment that you didn't plan for. So it's worth considering, one, which commitments are things that you can break or that you can avoid from the get-go, and to do it in such a way that it's either saving everybody a lot of trouble and misery, and avoiding a situation that just doesn't make sense for you to be in the first place, and then which ones make sense to kind of renegotiate or try to figure out a way to make it work in such a way that you're not breaking the commitment, you're just changing the dynamics of it. Again, every different commitment, every different person, every different situation, this is going to be a completely different thing. So there's no one absolute answer and no absolute way to know what to do for any of these things. But I would say do a lot of soul searching and figure out, who you are, what you want, what is okay to you morally, and then allow that to guide you. Because you don't want to break a commitment for like initial gain, only to have it kind of torture you on a morality level for the rest of your life. Or to know that you're causing pain to somebody else, for that to come back and haunt you in the future. So those are very vital concerns to keep in mind as you are figuring out what to do. And the second question today, how should I argue with very arrogant and very assertive people? But there's a couple of things that I like to keep in mind when I go into an argument. One, ideally, you go in with the idea of it being a discussion You want it to be productive. You want it to be practical. I made a separate video about this that you can hunt down, about having productive arguments. But the short version is that you go in willing to be convinced. That's important, and it's something that most of us do not do, and so it makes it kind of a purposeless argument if we do not do that. But you go in with the intention of, like, if they convince you, allow yourself to be convinced, and then it's more likely that they will do the same, and it's more likely that they will kind of adjust their stance to match yours. It's also really important to go in understanding your own point of view really well, so that if they bring up something that you hadn't considered, you already know what your response is without having thought about it ahead of time, and then being able to do the same with theirs. So you listen really closely to what they have to say, listen very actively, to the point that afterward you can actually argue their point, potentially even better than they can. You've paid close enough attention, and you understand their point of view enough that you can make that same argument. Then you're at a good point to actually go back and forth and maybe try to change a mind or two. But also remind yourself that it is not your responsibility in most cases to convince anybody of anything, unless it's actually your job or something to convince them of something. It's not your responsibility to convince anyone of anything. And so you can have one opinion, they can have another opinion, you can have one point of view, they can have another point of view. You can both be right for your perspectives, for your separate perspectives. You can both see the same thing and come away with very different conclusions. That's okay. That's normal. That's the way everybody is. And it is not your responsibility, just because you happen to be in an argument with this person, to convince them of anything. And it's not your responsibility to feign that you've been convinced or to fight back actively either. You are not the de facto representative for all of your beliefs in this way. Some people might assume that you are. But if they are trying to force you into the position of being the negotiator, the arguer for whatever view you happen to hold, it's a straw man argument. That doesn't make any sense. You are not responsible for that. So remember that it's not your responsibility to win in any real way. And also consider whether you need to be in the argument to begin with. If it's somebody that you do not enjoy arguing with, that you do not get anything out of the discussion or the argument, why are you doing it to begin with? Just don't allow yourself to be pulled into it. Typically, there are much better uses of your time than to find yourself in a non-practical, non-growth-oriented argument with somebody who seems to be incredibly aggressive in their stance. Almost anything else that you could be doing would be a better use of your time at that point if it's not something that you're benefiting from. Thanks so much for watching. If you would like to ask a question for me to answer in a future video, you can leave it in the comment section below or go to the Consider This Facebook page and ask there. You can also like this video or subscribe if you enjoyed it. You can find out more about me and my work at colin.io. My blog is at exilelifestyle.com. My podcast is at letsknowthings.com. And I am pretty much everywhere on the internet, all of the social networks. At Colin is my name.